Jealousy is one of the biggest obstacles I see to moving on after divorce in men. So often, my clients tell me that they were kind of okay with the divorce until they found out that she was dating somebody new. So, in this video, I'm going to share the specific story, case study of one client who really helped me realize how important an issue jealousy can be. This client also helped inspire me to create Better Beyond Divorce, which is a new group coaching program I've designed to help men recover their confidence, let go of their ex wife, and move on after their divorce. Let's call my client Jim. I've obviously changed his name and a few of the details to protect his privacy and his identity. Jim, like many of my clients, didn't come to see me until after he learned that his wife was dating again. He told me that he had been separated for well over a year, but only divorced for a few months. And he thought everything was kind of okay. He thought he was dealing with it and that he was feeling all right about the whole thing. Jim and his wife, we're going to call her Jenny, had been together for about 15 years and they had two children together. But the last few years had been pretty rough. Crappy communication, not much intimacy, and then bring on COVID and lockdown, and everything just spiraled. As painful as the split was, Jim really thought that he was handling it all right. And then a mutual friend told him that he had seen Jenny out to dinner with her new guy. For Jim, it was like somebody had just punched him in the gut. He had known that she would date, but somehow he hadn't fully imagined what it would be like to know that she was with another man. In that moment, all of the regret and the guilt and the shame and the frustration and the hurt of the divorce and of the years leading up to it came hurtling back. Because what Jim experienced is what so many men experience in divorce. Jenny's the one who filed, and she spent their whole separation and the months after telling Jim that it was all his fault, blaming him for it, telling him that he was controlling and manipulative and insensitive and emotionally unavailable. She told him he wasn't around enough, he didn't love her the way that she needed him to, and that he didn't appreciate her enough. Towards the end, she started to get downright mean to Jim. And this last part was the most painful to him because he spent a good 6 months of their separation taking a deep dive. He took what she said seriously and he got serious about doing his own inner work. And he made huge advances and changed the way that he was showing up in that relationship. He got in touch with his emotions. He became more sensitive and curious about her experience. And yet she just got more and more cruel, blaming him more fiercely to the point where at the end of the marriage, she actually accused him of using his self-development work as a way of manipulating her to keep her in a toxic relationship. He had worked so hard to change and to be the man that she wanted him to be. And when he tried to show her that, she accused him of trying to stop her from leaving a toxic marriage. Despite all of that pain, Jim stuck with his inner work and he found a measure of confidence, or at least he thought he did. But then when he found out that Jenny was dating and it hit him like that, he knew he needed help. He wasn't there yet. He couldn't stop thinking about her with this new guy, and the things that his brain would tell him were awful. He was always thinking, well, what does he have that I didn't? Why would she give him a chance when after all of these years and all of these things that we shared, she couldn't give me that opportunity? What is better about him? What is so good about him when I wasn't enough for her? He couldn't get the image of them being physically intimate out of his head. And poor Jim, I mean, his mental images of the guy were the worst. Because, of course, this guy in his mind's eye was everything that Jim hadn't been. He was not only the strong, stoic, sexy man that's portrayed in the movies, he was also somehow embodying this like mystical empathy and emotional intelligence that Jenny had accused Jim of lacking. The obsessive, painful power of that jealousy made Jim realize that he needed help. He wasn't moving on in the way that he thought he was. Jim got stuck in a place where a lot of men get stuck after divorce. You get stuck in needing your ex to see you differently so that you can see yourself differently. Jim still needed Jenny to finally see that he was good enough in order for him to let go of his own guilt and his own regret. But when she started seeing somebody else, he realized that forgiveness, that her seeing and understanding who he was now, that was never coming. In fact, it felt like her assessment of who he was just set in stone. It was never going to change. He would always be the one who wasn't enough for her. And now she'd proven that somebody else could be enough for her. For Jim, it was as though all of a sudden it was truly all his fault, and that could never change. Jim worked with me as a private client for 10 sessions, and during that time, I helped him achieve 6 important things. First, I helped Jim process what he was feeling because before you can do any inner work or any thought work that's actually meaningful and sticks, you have to deal with those feelings. Jealousy is so painful because it's deeply tied to our senses of guilt and shame. Those emotions, if left unprocessed, can make dealing with anything at the surface nearly impossible. The emotions we experience after a divorce also put us into a survival mode. The human brain naturally fears rejection and abandonment. And when I say fear, I mean in like a life and death kind of fear way. And when we look back at our evolutionary history, that makes perfect sense because look, I say this a lot, but we have no fangs, we have no claws, we have no fur. We are very poorly equipped to survive in a hostile world. So when you think about our ancestors, they were incredibly dependent on one another for survival. And if somebody was left alone, rejected, or abandoned by their people, they would likely die. So, in the human brain and in the human nervous system, rejection and abandonment are linked to a fear of death. So, when those emotions are active, when we're feeling rejection or abandonment actively, it puts our nervous system into fight or flight, into the survival mode. And in that place, it's really hard to access your prefrontal cortex and do any meaningful work there. By teaching Jim how to feel his emotions physically and how to allow them to move through his body, I was able to help him calm his nervous system and step out of that fight or flight survival mode. From that place, we were able to move on to the next step, which was to restore Jim's faith in himself. To do that, we had to take a deep dive inward to really shine the light on all the places inside of him that he was afraid were broken or bad. This step is honestly my favorite because it's often really intimidating to clients at first because they're truly afraid of what they're going to find. But I can tell you this, I have done this with a lot of people. And when we look inward, I never find a monster. I never find a narcissist. I never find somebody evil or bad or broken. What we always find when we look inward with compassion and curiosity is a human being whose actions and feelings and thoughts make sense and have always made sense when we understand the full picture of their internal experience. When Jim started to see that, it allowed him to start to separate out his actions in the past, some of which he really wasn't proud of or wished he could take back. He was able to separate those out from who he was, his sense of who he was as a person and what is possible for him as a person and as a partner. He realized not only that he's not a bad person, but he also discovered that he has a lot more power to manage his thoughts and his feelings than he ever knew. So, with that sense of faith, with hope in himself restored, we laid out a roadmap for Jim to build trust with himself because building trust with yourself and strengthening that relationship with self is much like building a relationship with any other person. I've talked a lot about these first two steps because they're so, so important. Once you have that foundation, able to process emotions and regulate your nervous system and restore your faith and connection with yourself, then we can move on to some of the fun work. For Jim, that meant making peace with the past and taking ownership of his future. He had to find forgiveness and closure. And he also had to clearly define what his future was going to look like. And part of that process was really taking ownership of the things that he can control while accepting all of those things that he cannot. Finally, Jim and I laid the foundation for him to have success in future relationships. I showed him a series of communication skills that he can use to foster connection and intimacy. And then we explored some useful frameworks for viewing men and women and finding a place of understanding in relationships. And finally, we explored emotional boundaries and their power to create deep and authentic connections with other people. What you might notice in this process is that Jim and I never worked directly with his jealousy. That's because jealousy is a symptom. It is not the cause of any of Jim's problems. Jim couldn't move on because he hadn't worked through the shame, guilt, regret, and grief around his divorce. The jealousy was just a symptom of his own self doubt and even of his own self loathing. As Jim developed the skills to process and regulate his emotions and began to develop more confidence in himself, the jealousy started to ease up. And then, as he did the work to really make peace with the past, forgiving himself and forgiving his ex, and taking control of his future, the jealousy went away completely. Jim also helped inspire me to create Better Beyond Divorce. That's a new group coaching program where I can help you overcome jealousy the same way that I helped Jim do it. If you'd like to learn more, leave me a note in the comments, reach out to me by email, or go ahead and just schedule a free consultation directly with me using the link in the video description below.